ever have a question about your cunt that you were too embarrassed to pose? Like, if I don't have sex for the next 8 years, will my pussy hole close? Well, buckle up, school's in session. These sex pros have planned a lesson, 'cause cunts aren't just for reproduction. Whether you were born with it or it's under construction, open your ears, 'cause the Clam Jam's got you covered. The Clam Jam.
Hello, and welcome to the Clam Jam, which is bi-monthly, which means twice monthly, a live conversation with myself, Vienna, the Cuntsultant, and a fabulous guest who is also a Cuntsultant in some kind of their own right. We're talking about vaginas, we're talking about things adjacent to vaginas, we're talking about things that impact vaginas. Today, though, what we'll be discussing is particularly abortion. And abortion is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. I think it's a really important thing that we should be talking more about. I know a little bit about abortion, but there's many other people who know many other things that I don't know. And that's a complicated way of saying we have a guest, because on the Clam Jam, we're jamming together. This is not a solo endeavor. It's a two-person, maybe more. We'll see. But today it's two people. So I am super excited to bring on our guest today, Sarah Ferguson, who I think also shares a name with a royal. Like, I don't keep track of these things. I'm going to have to ask her about, like, does she go by Fergie? These are questions I have. But what we will be talking about is Sarah's work in the birth world at large, and especially around abortion and expanding the conversation around abortion. So Sarah Ferguson of Birthing the Block. We can bring her on now.
Hi.
Welcome, Sarah.
How are you doing?
Hi. Welcome. Thanks for being here. How was your day?
It was great. Also, great theme song. Like, totally here for it.
Great. I mean, what I was trying to do is I was doing some research earlier and trying to see like look up things about you, and then I kept getting things about Sarah Ferguson, who was some royal. I don't keep up with this. So I was like,
New York, and she like drinks heavily, and I was like, yeah, this is. If I was a royal, this is who I would be. So
yeah, it tracks. It all tracks. So low key, you're a princess, right? Like, that's.
Sarah means princess, so it's like kind of redundant. Like,
perfect. Or maybe she was a duchess. I don't know. It doesn't matter. We are not here to talk about that Sarah Ferguson. We're here to talk about this Sarah Ferguson.
Yes.
You're over here. I don't know which way you are. I can't point. This screen is weird.
Yeah.
Awesome. So thanks for being here. I would love if you could just like intro the people to your amazing self and what makes you so great and fabulous.
Okay. Hi, my name is Sarah Ferguson. I am located in Los Angeles, California. Thanks to COVID, I work everywhere there is internet and phone service. I am a reproductive justice advocate and a doula trainer and a full spectrum doula. Birth and abortion are kind of like my main jams. Those are like my bread and butter. I started off in abortion work and death work and transitioned to birth. Now I'm here, and I don't know how long I've been here. It seems like it's been a long time.
So you went from death to birth, not birth to death.
You would be surprised like how similar of processes they are and how many of the questions are the same. And people are like, what is wrong with you? And I'm just like, did you really think this on either?
Like, it's the circle of life.
No, quite literally. And you should worry a little bit, but not a lot, but just enough.
Totally. So you work as a doula. That's your primary role, or the primary thing you call yourself?
Yes. Yes, I'm a birth worker, doula. I just help birthing people in general. And somehow my bills get paid, and I'm grateful for it.
This is great. This is great stuff. So with that, part of the, there's the full spectrum of it all, right? So I don't know if you use that term to describe your work, but full spectrum doula is definitely, I don't know. I don't do birth stuff generally, but full spectrum doula generally means for people, we work with death and we work with birth. We work with the whole spectrum, and that can include helping someone through a birth, helping someone through a miscarriage, through an abortion, helping someone through an adoption, helping someone through a surrogacy, right? There's all these different ways that one can be a doula or a support person.
Absolutely. I think I just kind of like to refer to myself as like a birth outcome support person, right? Because as a doula, you learn very quickly, like, you get sold into like these happy birth outcomes, and then like they stop, and then you're like, oh, okay, so here's the full range of like birth outcomes, and now I need to figure out how to support people through that.
Yeah, I think that's such an important part of it, because it's like, and this is, we'll get into this more, right? I mean, growing up in the United States and in like a poor but very white part of the world, it was like you just kind of you just expected babies to live, and generally they do, which is much different than it was like maybe 100 years ago, right? But, you know, so like all this conversation around birth is like, oh, it's like so easy, and you just like, you have a baby and it's so great, and then you have this baby and it's the most wonderful thing, and everything is like easy. Pregnancy might be uncomfortable, but it's like good.
Right.
It's fine. But there's little discussion, and it's changing more now, but little discussion about not all pregnancies end in a live baby, either by choice or, you know, chance. It's not the same for everybody in this country, right? Like there's I remember, I think in college was the first time I learned about how bad our birth outcomes were in the US.
Sure.
Like we were like listed 40th. Yeah. And it wasn't until I was like, that's horrifying. And I had no idea. How could I not know this? And then it wasn't until much later there's like, oh, it's because it's so bad for Black women that it makes the rest of our average just like shit. Like that is a significant problem.
Like definitely the grains of rice that tip the scale.
Yeah.
American, like it's hard because like birth is medicalized in like all these quote unquote developed countries. And so like things exist in a funnel. Like you don't really know people's birth outcomes unless you're like at the birth. And unfortunately, like we think a lot of bad things are normal and they're not. And like previous birthing generations are not here to be like, this is ridiculous and you should probably stop this right now. Because, you know, it's the circle of life. They're not supposed to be here. But the medicalization of birth is like really like left us out of the loop as to just like, there are so many birth outcomes. There are so many like variations of pregnancy and variations of normal and variations of healthy that we just don't even think about. And like, it's unfortunate that like our medical system is set up this way.
Absolutely. It is very, yeah. Well, so I guess with that, like one of the things I love about your work, which is many things, but one of them, your mission, which is all bodies, all outcomes, all reasons. And I would love to hear you like talk a little bit more about what that means to you specifically.
I think for me, I came into birth work, like, you know, the rosy kaleidoscope glasses, like it's going to be great. And it's going to be all these pretty fucking births. And then I got my heart broken. And I didn't realize just how exclusionary like mainstream birth work was, you know, and I was like, oh, there is no space for me as like a Black femme woman, like a person who's like very much politically like minded and charged. There's just no space for that. But like, we're also like the most impacted by disparities. And that was just kind of disgusting to me. And I think for me, like all bodies, like all people, regardless of like your gender, your religious, like sect, creed, tongue, or language, like you deserve the right to care because you're a human being and nothing else. I think reason, like what I have noticed is like, there is like this really like deep twinge of like giving people the right. Like we assume different people have like different rights, especially in medicine. And we try and justify and dignify and take away people's dignity. And it's just like this really nasty game that like causes material harm and like people to actually die because of what we assume about them. And I think like all reasons are valid. I'm not here to play God. That's like not my job. I'm just here to be a support because that's what I signed up to do. I'm not here to tell you what reason is or is not valid. So that's kind of all reason. And then all outcomes, you know, I just feel like you're a very sad birth worker if the only thing you know how to support is birth. You know, because everything is always on the table. I remember one of my mentors very early on was like, the longer you get here, the longer you're here, the more you're going to see. And you're just going to be like, very little about birth. Like the birth is nice. Great, but it's like 5% of the journey.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, especially when it comes to thinking about prepare, like with pregnancy, like it all, of course, like you're doing the pregnancy and you're like trying to manage through your pregnancy in all these different ways. And then it's all about the birth, which is super important because like how that's a crazy process your body goes through. You're bringing the baby into the world, all these things. And then it stops. And then it goes like, you got the baby, bye. Like as far as the rest of the continuum of care goes for that infant and that, you know, parent, that's shady. And then like, so the pregnancy, the birth, and then support kind of drops off a cliff really fast.
All really bad. It's all really inadequate and it's all really bad.
And really bad extra, like if the outcome is not a healthy live baby, right? Like there's like, well, oh, that's not even a thing we do. Like that's not a thing we even take care of.
It's just, and that's, I think, all outcomes, like as a trainer for me and as a facilitator, I always like to tell my students, like, listen, I'm going to give you all this information. I want you to sit with it because you came to my door and now I told you the truth. And like, you need to decide if you want to stay here or not. I don't want you to think about like certification. I don't want you to think about any of that. I want you to think about all this information that we just went through. Like, do you understand that like you are probably going to have to facilitate these things? And if that makes you uncomfortable, that is okay. It's just a boundary, but be honest about it because sometimes these outcomes just creep up on you. It's like we're happy, we are hopeful, and then, you know, things just happen. There's just chance in the universe.
Yeah. Birth is wild. People like to say that. I think like in a way, I don't know. I don't know how people say it, but it comes off to me often like birth is wild, but like with this
it's like rave wild, and I'm like more. It's like Jumanji wild.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. It's like, it's a beautiful, wild thing, but wild is not always gentle. Wild is probably not gentle. Wild is not necessarily caring about your feelings or anyone else's feelings. Wild is just doing its own thing.
Right. I think we say it and we really don't understand like the gravity of like what wild means.
Or wild is, oh no, just like I'm thinking like watching a nature documentary, like we watched some recently. It's just like, oh, nature is just a reminder. Nature's crazy and nature just like eats you or leaves you out to die.
It's a very different like ideal of justice. Like nature is like very listening. I'm sorry you were a kitten out here, but that bobcat is like here to get you. Like that's it.
It's intense. Yeah, so things to consider. So I'm curious, what brought you into like, we're going to say reproduction. What brought you to reproduction as a facilitator and as a practitioner? What was like your little entryway?
You know, I think I was like always here. I think I just like started doing it for work. So I've always been like we're going to Planned Parenthood friend. I've just always kind of been like the escort person. But in college, I was a sex educator, and they had a doula panel in one of my courses. And I was like, first of all, you people go to birth and you get paid for it and you get to like help your community. And what was really special about the panel was like everybody was Black. And of course we were in the Bay, so like it made sense. But after college, I was just like, I'm not as corporate as I thought I was going to be. Like, I'm not a corporate badass. Like, I struggle to watch the world be bought and sold. And I just think birth work works for me. I get to like do all the things that I'm good at, which is like organize, plan, teach, without like the restrictions of like 9 to 5 and like evaluation. But birth work specifically, I just have a big family. So I've always been going to people's births. So like the only difference for me now is like, you're not my cousin, but like you look like my cousin, but you're not my cousin. But yeah, I think it was just a very natural progression. Got trained. And I think for me, like this field, it has a very high like turnover rate. And so I think I'm here because the industry let me stay. Like, I think it's been very kind in that way, but I know the day I get kicked out, like, it is what it is.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting to phrase it that way. I feel like I've heard of people say it more of like their personal journey, like I'm burnt out and I'm done and I'm leaving. And like, I didn't choose to leave. It was just like, my body was like, no more. But I mean, I'd love you to say more on that, but for me, it sounds like you're in service. If people are like, we don't need your service anymore.
Yeah, no, quite literally, I'm like, I'm a service. If you need help, I'm here. But like the moment people like stop coming and I'm hungry, like this is over. Like, like that's it. I also think my role as like a teacher has kind of allowed me like way more freedom than I thought. I love teaching. I think direct care, like I can definitely see that. COVID just kind of threw everything like a year ahead of schedule. Like I thought I was just going to go teach next year and then, you know, kind of trickle out of direct care. But COVID said, we're going to double your amount of birth clients and you're going to teach. So now, and I'm just like, sleep. I miss you. I would like to be in bed before 1, but it's not happening. So whatever.
Yeah, birth work is really not a career where you get to sleep a lot. Like if sleep is a high priority for you, like maybe don't attend birth.
No, uninterrupted sleep. I get catnapped and then like the phone rings and then I'm just like, and all my clients always ask me, were you up? Because I like always sound chipper when I answer the phone at like 1 a.m. and they're like, wow. And I'm just like, no, this is my phone voice. I was actually knocked out cold, but I'm here to help you.
That's good. That's a good skill. So I don't think I knew you were teaching. So I'd love to hear more about that. So what does that look like? How do you teach? Tell me more.
Okay. So I think for me, my style as a teacher is like, so my background is in language and discourse. And so, yeah, I like definitely did like a 180 shift after undergrad. I was like, from hippie to like hipster. It all happened. But
I was a Japanese major. I studied Japanese all throughout college. So,
yeah, my background's in language and discourse. So I think I definitely take a political approach to teaching. I think all my work like definitely has like a Black feminist framework. I think like it's kind of like a bell hooks approach. Like we're trying to bring like the margin to the center. I think those most impacted should be those that we talk about and like those who we're like reaching out to as like primary and secondary sources, which does not happen in public health at fucking at all. But I think it should. and so I think that's my approach to work is like, what is actually happening? What tangible things can we do? What has historically worked? How do we do these things outside of the government? Like, I think those are the questions whenever I like formulate a class or like things I'm always trying to answer. And I also think like my job as teaching is more facilitating. Like I'm just here to like bring you facts and evidence in like a cute, concise way. And then we're going to talk about it and like dismantle it and figure out, is it applicable or not?
I like that. Yeah, I think there's a thing I'll say occasionally where it's like, this is a problem that we figured out a while ago. Like we have solutions and ways to deal with this. We're just ignoring all this historical information. So why don't we like look at it and see if we can bring it back?
No, quite literally. I'm like, so here's what worked in like 1915 over here in Delaware. And people are like, oh, I didn't know this happened. And I'm like, we should.
And it's like update it, right? Like not because it's old is not necessarily like because our ancestors did it and because it's old is not, or traditional is not necessarily a good reason to keep it, but it's not a good reason to throw it out either. Like
absolutely. I feel like the adage is like, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's like, listen, it might be old. It definitely needs to be updated. But it doesn't mean it's broken. And it doesn't mean it's disposable.
Yeah, I think maybe you made a post about this. I'm trying to think. But this idea, especially when it comes to birth, and I remember learning, I think maybe the first time I really learned this in a way that I held on to it was through Kelly Garza of Steamy Chick. Mm-hmm. But this idea that like through colonization and through globalization, all these things, when, you know, the colonizing force moves in and says, we're going to make you modern, you backwoods people, they throw out all the medicine and say, you got to go to a hospital now. Like if you want to have real care like a civilized person, go to a hospital. Where prior to that coming in, there's great things that modern medicine has done, absolutely. But prior to that, like there was a lot that was already being handled perfectly fine, and that additional intervention causes more problems.
Right.
And that's,
I just think Western medicine is like a medicine of intervention. Of course, it's like it's colonial medicine, and like that is okay, but we also have to be very honest about like its shortcomings. It doesn't like offer any like real community care. And also like medicine is not supposed to be monetized. And like that inherently like denatures like the healing aspect of medicine. And like that's something that has to be talked about. I'm all socialized medicine. Like, listen, we should not, your doctor should not be worried about a billing code. Your doctor should be like, listen, here's the 10 things that I need to do with you, and let's just get them done. And then whatever it is after that, it is after that. But like it's unfortunate like doctors like have to like work in like in a business model. It's unfortunate. Like I do understand like, yes, this is a brick and mortar building. Overhead is real, but like, no, we can afford to do more.
And also it's like, on that point, we decided to make this a system. This hasn't always, it's not like a fact of nature, right? It's not gravity. We're not dealing with
It's not even 100 years old.
Yeah. Well, so which reminds me, so actually something, let's see here, where do I want to go with this? Something I think about a lot is the formation of formalized medicine, professionalized medicine. Yes. And it's a complicated conversation, I think, currently, but that's only because like we've been given this model and we're operating within that model. And like talking about, you know, the history of the American Medical Association and how it was just like a bunch of privileged, rich white dudes, more or less, who said, we're doing medicine now. All you like folk healers and midwives and community healers and quacks, just you don't count anymore because we want the dollars. We want to like.
Well, I also think it's more than money. It's about political power, right? Like if this is like any like basic like colonial, like we are here to like impose ourselves on you, like war tactic, like healers have political power in their like homes because, you know, if I'm sick, I'm going to see like this person. Clearly you know half the neighborhood. What you say like carries weight. You have authority. People trust you. You are a political entity, and like they needed to destabilize that power. And specifically, like I think the greatest example, or one of the greatest examples that we have of that in America, is like midwives. Like there are so many states that like still have like midwifery laws like that ban them, right? Or like there still isn't like a structure in the United States to like actually integrate midwives into medicine, right? Like it's always like this kind of longhand situation, and that's because like at one time, like there are more midwives here than anything else, and like they were self-sufficient. We didn't need doctors to say what they said, and it also was like this very strong league of like AFAB folks that had like money, power, and they were colored, right? Mm-hmm. And like, of course, this was like a very different time racially, but like that's a lot, and that's a lot to compete with for like a colonial power that's trying to assert itself. So you send them all to jail and make their job illegal for the next 100 years and then kill everybody consequently because of it. But we're here.
We made it through. I mean, it's a really important part of the history. I am a believer in like, you got to know the history to understand why we're here. And under like, maybe then we change things or maybe we leave it. I don't know. But at least you have to, we don't exist in a vacuum. There's a lot of events that led up to why we're here. And the fact is like midwifery itself, I think is getting, you know, a lot of stuff has changed even, I feel like the last 20 years. Yeah. Like wildly so. I remember watching The Business of Being Born in college, which was now
like I love that video.
So good. Which was like 10 years ago now. And it was radical at the time. And I haven't watched it recently, but I imagine it's still pretty radical. But a lot has changed. Like people know what a midwife is, more or less. More people know what a doula is. Still a lot, like still so much to do.
Right. I still think we're the same thing, but I mean, at least it's in the conversation, and that's like we're getting somewhere. We're making progress. I don't know. I just also like I also grew up in like a very interesting like time warp. My dad was a lot older, and so like I just thought being born at home was like a really natural thing. And like I was always like, yeah, I'm gonna have my kids at home. We're gonna do this. Like I also just don't like hospitals.
Sure.
Well, that helped. But I always like, even like going to school, like I would watch like, what is that show? I think it's like Birthday or something on TLC early in the morning. It's like just a whole bunch of babies.
I didn't have TV as a child, so I don't know.
It's okay. It's like this 6 a.m. only God and CNN are on show options. And I would just watch that. And I was like, I'm going to work around birth. I'm going to work around birthing people. And so.
Yeah. I also grew up in kind of like a hippie, crunchy-ish family. I mean, there's lots of things to say about my family, but that's kind of where I was. And when I was a pregnancy, my parents were into like doing it the natural, like a holistic natural way. And they were written up in a magazine because it was like, and they were in New York. And my mom was like involved with some stuff. So they were like, ooh, people doing natural birth. It's crazy. Like that was the whole thing. And I turned out to be extremely stubborn and did not want to go along with this at all. Like my mom was going to do no medication. I'm pretty sure it was going to be at a hospital no matter what. I can't remember. But I was like, me being like, actually, no, I'm going to get stuck in your pelvis and refuse to come out and you'll just have to do a C-section.
That's okay. Listen, and that's like why we're like attached to like just the journey and not the outcome. And this is what I tell all my clients, because you're going to have babies like you who know best.
Assholes.
You know best. No, and then they grow up and you're just like, okay, it all makes sense now. Because I look at some of my kids and I'm like, yeah, it makes sense these days. Why you got here the way you did. Don't be attached to please just go on the journey and it's really hard because it's like also there's like this very delicate balance of like you being the birthing person, but like also like you partially being like vessel container and like you're not in control.
Yeah.
Like it's like this really sick, twisted agreement that 6 billion people have clearly made to like, I'm going to birth someone and then I've never met this person. Like, yes, they've saddened me, but like, I don't know you. And I'm going to trust you to like, let you do this to me. And clearly it all turns out okay, but.
Yeah. It's crazy.
It's wild.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and just like this, something that I grew up with though, within that structure is this idea of like, yeah, of course I want to have a baby at home. Like for whatever reason, that was like a normal thing to me. And then I started to like, this started to be a conversation at other places. And I recognized like a lot of people didn't know that was an option or thought it was a terrifying option or like would never in a million years consider having doing birth without, a ton of drugs or like not being conscious. Right.
So afraid of needles. I know I'm like tattooed and that sounds so ridiculous, but like needles that go inside of me are very different from needles that are on top of me.
Sure.
I also would like to say that like having a baby at home is still a very privileged experience in America. Like only 2% of people in the United States give birth at home. Like quite literally like 2.
Yeah.
So all these like Instagram home births, like this is like the same 4,000 people that know each other.
Yeah. Well, so let's talk about the home base. And I don't know how much you do in like the home setting, but
I go everywhere.
Yeah. So I'm always interested in like the things that we can do at home. Like there's like DIY gynecology is near and dear to my heart.
Listen, we live in California, okay? They will take us to jail.
Well, it's all these things, right? There's the government side of it, and then there's like what we should be allowed to do with our bodies. And
right, I always like to have that conversation.
And it's a complicated. It's also, or maybe not complicated, but it's nuanced, right? Like me doing stuff at home versus you doing stuff at home.
Listen, I'm always like different. We do stuff, but don't
talk about it. So something we don't have to talk about this. But
no, we can totally talk about it. I've like mastered the legal language of like what I can.
Great. So this idea that I think that's often like very upsetting, or like the idea of taking medical care out of a hospital in broad strokes, medical care really freaks people out because there, this idea of like, well, you have to be in a certain environment. The hospital is the only appropriate place, or the clinic is the only appropriate place for medical care. Ooh, hit the microphone. But for some things, absolutely. Like, I don't want to have heart surgery on my couch.
Yeah, no, that's not happening ever.
But I did have my pap smear on my couch recently, and that was fine. And, birth is a thing that you can do at home and can be fine. And you can miscarry at home and it's fine physically, right? Maybe emotionally, it's a different story. Abortion.
Probably feel better than a hospital.
Sure, we can do all these other things that generally, like, well, you have to like go through the medical system. You have to be like part of all of that in order to get good quality care. But that's not true. And it's also historically not true. And it's not just because like we're modern now and we go to hospitals.
I think for me as like a Black person, something I always keep in mind is like the current like mortality rate for like birthing people is higher now than it was during like in comparison to enslavement. So like I don't think hospitals are safe places. I actually think they're quite dangerous. And I'm like very open about that. But I also think we don't really know like what wellness or like illness looks like, right? And so we think everything does need to be like consulted by like this medical hospital that it really doesn't. Like you can do a lot of things at home, and I think birth is one of them. I think it complements our anatomy. I think it complements just so many things because like to have a baby at home and like not have to go back home. Like I love watching my home birth clients like walk from the living room to their bed and like that's where they are for like the next 40 days. Like that was we are already where we're going. Like there's no come home. There's no going to the doctor. Like your midwife comes to your house. I think that is just like such a care model shift that like is really empowering to a lot of folks that most people don't even know exists. So that's an option.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I mean, like, you know, power dynamics, which is a huge part of this conversation as well. But, you know, if you're in your own, you know, you go to the hospital, you go to where the doctor is versus the doctor coming to you or the midwife or whoever, that's a pretty substantial power. You're on your own turf, right? You have home court advantage. Is that what they say in sports? I don't know.
Yes.
So that's I don't know if you have things you want to add to that in your experiences as a doula. Like I'm sure you've worked in all settings, as you said.
I've worked everywhere it is legal to have a baby in the state of California. I have worked. A couple illegal places that we'll talk about off the record.
What are the illegal places? Okay, so in the state, because we're both in California, where can you not have a midwife? Or okay, tell me more about that. Tell me the
okay, so in the state of California, practicing medicine without a license is like a crime. Like, and it's a big one. Well, like these people will come get you. Like the sheriff, all the people are knocking at your doors looking for you. That is not true for the rest of the United States. There are a lot of places where there's just nothing legally to say, so it's whatever it is. But in the state of California, and of course, shout out to Hollywood, you can legally have a baby in a hospital, a birth center, or at your house, given there's like a medical provider present. And of course, you know, there's always like that gray area of like, my baby slid out. What did you want me to do? like, what is there? And then that becomes its own like legal headache because now you have to like prove that what you're saying is like actually what happened.
I didn't know that part about like if your baby just pops out.
You're not having listen. You'll be so mad. So many people call me about like paperwork problems, and I'm just like, there's this little place in Norwalk, California. You have to call them and tell them your problem and get witnesses. So it's a lot. It's also tied a lot to who belongs here, right? And like the creation of like, do you not belong here? Do you belong here? Like, who are you, right? Because how you're born is like essentially tied to like who you are. Like, what is your relation to this country? What is your relation to this state? Like, can we track you now from here on out? Because we really don't know. Like, there's this window of time that you didn't exist in like government care that like scares them, and so like now they need it to be over-explained to them. Which is the paperwork process. That's essentially all the questions. How did this happen? Who was there? And it's like 50 plus pages of these like ridiculous, very evasive questions for state legitimacy purposes.
Yeah, that's like so much to unpack. It makes me think about a couple things, and it makes me think about abortion and miscarriage, and I want to transition there. It also makes me think about things like free birth. So free birth, I have complicated feelings about free birth. My top line feeling is like, you should be able to do whatever you want with your baby in your body when the baby's being born. Once it's like a physical baby, then like there we should, you know, we
should have like care parameters. Like, listen, I need you to feed it every so often. I need you to take care of it. Like, you know, we need to do the thing. what do you want to talk about? Because you listed several things, and I'm like,
no. So I guess I didn't realize that, because in my mind, well, I don't know. I felt like, what does that paperwork headache? Is that a real headache? If you're like, I'm doing, my baby slid out, but it was a planned slide out, but you don't need to know that.
it's a headache either way, right?
Okay.
Like, we're talking about the government. We're talking about people and like how you exist in relation to the government. So this is like not an easy set of paperwork. Like, I think if you are like one of those precipitous labor folks who like has the good fortune of like having babies fast, like they make it a headache. Like they make your easy birth not so easy for a part of. Like they try and take that from you. I'm like, how dare we punish this person for having a nice fast birth with all these questions and all this running around Los Angeles County? How dare you? Like, it's hard. But it also just brings into like context, like your body is only somewhat yours.
Right.
Right. Because like they need to document, they need to know all of these things. And it's like, I'm alive. We're fine. Can you just hand me the birth certificate? Because I'm also here. Thank you.
Yeah. So what does that look like then? So let's transition into abortion and miscarriage especially. Like, let's go to the lost end of the spectrum.
Okay.
And so miscarriage is oftentimes a thing that's accompanied with a great deal of grief, although everyone has a different experience of miscarriage. And so if that happens at home, is there a whole bunch of paperwork that has to go into that as well? Like, what does that look like for people in that situation?
No, and this is actually where things get really messy. Miscarriage does not come with as much paperwork, but it also comes with very little care.
Right.
Like you get Tylenol and to go home. Like that is kind of like the extent of your medical care. Like their concerns are like, is it complete? Were you early? Were you late? And like they have like these very metric-based questions, but they're not care-based, right? Like it's not the same. And it isn't the same even when it comes to like infant death and infant demise. Like there is paperwork, but it's not that same evasive, we are trying to prove something about the way that you exist paperwork. It only becomes a paperwork situation, and this is where it gets really messy and nasty, is if you are a repetitive client.
If it's happened more than once.
Right. And so like, it starts to become, are you doing this intentionally? What's like the nature of like, what's happening? Right. And it's definitely not a diplomatic like set of questions. Yeah. You know, it's very like, what's going on? And it's not the way I talk to my clients. And I always have to brief them of like, listen, now you are considered X, Y, and Z. And so I need you to like, know that this is about to be like very messy and I'm sorry. But this is what is going to happen because this is protocol in this situation. And I always like to be honest about that because it's hard and it's just nasty on like.
Yeah. I mean, and it does seem like such a slap in the face in all these different ways, right? Where you're already going through something that's likely traumatic, right? In the case of a miscarriage. And then, you know, just to have like invasive cold responses and Tylenol is
like, that's it.
Yeah. Yeah.
We don't. Yeah, I think, and that's like where this conversation of like, of course I call it SMA, self-managed abortion, gets really complicated in the US because there are so many things. Like, because again, I always talk about like miscarriages, according to your doctor, are spontaneous abortions, right?
Right.
And like political language is not medical language, and medical language is not political language. To your doctor, like this is like an abortion, right? And so this language of like self-managed abortion gets really complicated because you do send people home. Mm-hmm. Like most abortions care take place at home, unless like you are receiving a surgery like as a form of treatment. Like this is at home business. So why can't I do the whole job at home?
Right.
Like why? Like why can I not?
And it's historically been home business. I think that's a thing that we forget with, again, all medicine, but specifically when it comes to reproductive medicine, this was always an at-home private thing. It's only until recently that you had to leave the house to go like see the midwife for your abortion, your birth, whatever it was.
I just also think like we need to know like the only reason like we have obstetrics is because of like the end of the slave trade. Like that is the only reason like white men were interested in like fat bodies. Like that is it. Like
say more about that. Yeah.
So like it's like 1807, America like stopped importing like new enslaved folks. And so like now and slaveholders were like faced with like this new problem. How do we like increase like our supply, like our property? Like how do we like get new people to work? Okay, well we make them, right? And so like the business of fertility in America revolves around like people working, right? And like people being chattel. And so like prior to that, like doctors did not touch like women. Like if you go back and look at like the early like medical journals, like women being treated or like covered up, like the doctor is trying to look. It's just this like very absurd like tactics, and I'm like, do you think this is like sufficient?
Right, they're like looking. They're like they have their hand up their skirt and they're looking away. Like
I was like, this is also what's wrong with sex in America. We still have people trying to like touch people and look away. Yeah, it's not about care; it's about capital, and so like we are still like trying to reckon with that. And like America is still not invested in like the welfare of like people who look like me because it's not profitable. Like at the bottom, like at the very end of the day, it's just not profitable. And like a Model T Ford style hospital, taking time is not profitable.
Yeah, damn, that's like that's just you dropped a bunch of truth on me.
I do this to people. I'm like, I'm sorry.
No, it's awesome. I'm fine. I love it. I don't love it, but I love the discussion.
Right, like, yes.
Yeah. And I think it's a super important part, and to always bring it back to that, right? Like there's a lot of things, and I'm thinking, I don't think I have yet to hear someone put it that way, especially with like the dawning of obstetrics. Generally, the way that I'm thinking about the book, Midwives. Which is Midwives and Nurses, right? Yep. Which is an excellent little tiny booklet about like the basics, but I don't think that comes up in that book as much. Like
I don't think that's not racially good, right? I think
sure.
We've also like had this very like these kind of like intersecting identities of like there's like different kinds of feminism, and like it's like Black femmes are like just being allowed to like kind of come into this conversation that we have created as like not subject, but like as in like we're leading these conversations, and like for the first time people are hearing like our side of like no, you took my grandma out of business and now you're complaining that you fucked this shit up, and I'm going to tell you that this is your fault. And so I think a lot of people are like, it is new, and it is new information that like we're processing.
Sure. Yeah. So with that, I think this is good. This is the segue then. Okay. So you made this post a while ago, which I really enjoyed. And there's obviously always new parts of the conversation for me to learn about, but this idea, so the post, which you said is pro-choice is antiquated white feminist rhetoric.
Oh, hell yeah. I think it's hard. Like
the term pro-choice. Yeah. Sorry. Just to back up.
Quite literally like the term pro-choice. Like my political mind is like, this is the baddest shit ever, right? Because like I think I understand things as like political theories. Like in the United States of America, my body is mine. I should be able to do whatever I want to because it's my choice, right? However, I'm like also like a Black working person, and I'm like, yeah, I think it's a lot more complicated than that, given the fact like reproductive health is also occurring in like this world stage of like population control and like immigration and like all these things, and like there is like a context of legitimacy that like I just don't belong to that I have not historically been a part of, and I won't be a part of because it's just not descriptive of my experience. But I also think it's really hard to get like Black folks to talk about abortion because of like this pro-choice rhetoric of like, yeah, no, it's actually a little bit more complicated than that. And just even this notion of choice, like, is it a choice if I'm going to starve to death if I'm pregnant? Like, am I making a choice? Is that really a choice?
Yeah.
And I think that's like the framework that like I try and operate from. Like, I think abortion is much more complicated than like this notion of choice. Choice is a very privileged, like aspect. Like I have had very few people come to me and say like, I had an abortion just because I wanted to. You know, like that is yet to happen.
My choices for the day were like have an abortion, go to the mall.
I had my honey bunches of oat and then I popped 4 misoprostol. Like that was my like that is nobody's like statement. However, like the American political context of abortion is I'm pro-choice, right? But like no one is saying that. Like
well, and then it begs the question of like, what are your choices? Like, so it's like you're pro-choice, but are you saying like the choice is have the baby, not have the baby? True, that is a choice. Like technically speaking, we have a choice here, but that's not how life works, right? It's never just like, should I have this baby or not?
Or should I not? And I also don't, and I hate pro-choice rhetoric because it also does not account for the fact that like pregnancy itself can be dangerous and harmful to people. Like, I don't think we understand, like, I think of like reproductive health is very tied to labor rights. Because, you know, any like medical condition, regardless if it's fleeting or not, is going to impact like if you can or cannot work. And so I come from a community where like a lot of us are head of household. To be pregnant comes with like a lot of like variables that most people, unless you work in reproductive health, don't think about. Okay, so I'm having a baby. Okay, so I have to be pregnant. I have to take time off work from anywhere to 6 to 10 weeks in order to like heal. I think for me, like, I think about like the American workforce and like most people are tip workers. And like, I understand I live in very privileged Los Angeles and I have like a very privileged experience. But most people like live off of their tips. So not to be at work and to be pregnant and to have a baby means like this is costing you money.
Yeah.
And so are you really, is choice really a conversation or is this about survival?
Yeah. And I think, and again, like growing up, right? And there's my dog outside the door. Growing up in, you know, it was socioeconomically very diverse, but it was pretty racially white.
Right.
But having this, like pro-choice made sense, like in my limited view of like not being a person who ever had a baby, knowing a few people had babies at younger ages and older ages. And it seemed like a choice, right? Like the choice is like, do I want to have this baby or not? Without all of the like real life things of, you know, having a baby means all these different things. Like I become a parent. I have to take care of this baby. I have to take care of myself. It jeopardizes my career. It jeopardizes my health potentially. Yeah.
My health.
Health. And I think that's a great point of like, it's not just like whether or not to be pregnant, because when we say that, we assume that pregnancy isn't that big of a deal. Like just people get pregnant and it's no big deal. And pregnancy is a huge fucking deal.
It's a huge deal. And there's like so many liabilities that we don't think about. I like always like to tell people like, listen, this is like a really big like merger and you need to think about what you do and don't have. And we need to be honest about what we do and don't have so that we can make good choices because it's a lot. And I think it's a lot that you don't realize until you're in it. And then it's too late to turn around.
Right.
But I also don't think we talk about like when things go wrong.
Right.
There's very little conversation about like we're animals. Like we are mammals. And it's like, you know, when animals start to feel trapped, how do they respond? And so we instead like to shame people. And I'm like, did we talk about this before? Did we listen to this person before they went off this way? Like, what could we have done? Because it's not a part that like exists in like reproductive health. Like, I think it's like very off and like ancillary. And I'm like, I think most emotional things, especially when you're like dealing with like reproductive health, it's like it's this very delicate hormone cycle. Mm-hmm. These emotional feelings are like going to physically manifest, and then you're gonna have a person who has like all these quote unquote issues that like we could have resolved had we listened to them. How we just believed them. We just could have saved our time and believed you the first time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for so many things. So I'm curious. Let's see here. What I want to ask you about. So tell me. Okay, so we're expanding the conversation on abortion. When you're thinking about abortion, when you're thinking about what's a useful conversation on abortion, what does that mean to you? Like, what do you want to see brought into the conversation more? What do you see happening with your clients? What do you see happening in the communities that you serve? I
think safe space is really important. I think just bringing up the conversation, because it's not a conversation that exists. It's not like, unless I like started in my living room with my family. Like, it's not a conversation that's happening.
Sure.
So I think,
and it's not happening well. Like abortion, like the conversation on abortion is really like, it's like, should you have one or should you not? Like, should people be allowed to have abortions or not? And
right,
that's
like,
the end of the conversation. And that's a stupid conversation.
It's a really bad. I also, listen, I know this sounds really bad and very un-American. I wish we would stop asking the general public about fucking public health. Like, please stop asking people these questions. Just make it all available and move on. Like, please stop asking people who don't know what this means. Please, just that is the conversation I would like to have. Let's just stop talking about it. Like, I also think, like,
Sarah's response: abortion. Stop talking about it.
I don't want to talk about it no more. I don't want to. How can I help you? Like, I think, like, it shouldn't be a conversation for, like, the general populace, right? Like, I think when it comes to access, like, I don't think the general public should be able to make, like, it just should all be accessible. It's medical care, right? Like, it is very, like, basic nominal level. It's medical care. It should all be accessible. That should be between you and your provider, not me and, like, my views of, like, a political entity that I may or not agree with. Like, no, it's healthcare. It should just be readily accessible. I also think, like, people should just learn how to mind their own business. I don't know. I feel there's just so many reproductive conversations that I feel like could not be had. I know it sounds so weird, but it's like I think you're right. Like, should or should be the conversation. It should be like, how are you doing? How can I support you? Do you need soup? What would you like to eat? Do you need a hot water bottle? Like, those, like, I just think some questions should be banned from the conversation.
I mean, it's a good point. I think, do you know the account Abortion Diva?
No.
I don't remember her name off the top of my head, but she's great. And she, her whole thing is pro mind your business. So she made all this merch that just says pro mind your damn business. And I love it. But for me, it's a moot conversation simply because it's not like if we make abortions illegal, which we have done, if that happens again, it's not like they stop happening.
The only thing on the table is safety.
Exactly.
And that's why I'm like, we should stop asking the general public, because they're not public health officials. Like, they just, and it's, again, because our conversation around abortion is political. It's not public health. It's like, I feel like, and it's like, okay, but what does that mean? Like, what does it mean when it has legs? Because your feelings are, they are reflected in, like, the medical system. So, like, I feel like people can have abortions means people who have miscarriages and stillbirths have really shitty care. That's what that means.
Yeah.
And nobody thinks about that. No one says that. Like, it's like, no. So, okay, you can have this ideal, but who are you, like, unintentionally harming in the process does not come into play enough. And it's like, no, I actually feel completely different. I don't think there should be any restrictions. I think if doctors need medicine, they need to be able to figure it out in, like, real time. So I'm not here to do that.
Yeah. No, I mean, it is a good point about so that is part of it that we don't think about. It's like a stillbirth or a non-viable pregnancy, or, before the birth part, or it's like, the whole conversation about late-term miscarriage or late-term abortion. Is that what the far right says? Which is not a thing that happens, and it's a thing that it's a, like, I don't know what they mean by late-term abortion, right? It's undefined.
And so I think, again, because political language is not medical language, like, in the medical context, there is this thing called a DNX. However, what people don't understand is that that's stillbirth management, right? Like, this is how it is applied. But unless you, like, read a medical journal, you would not know that. But the people who read medical journals don't hold these ideals. So.
And that's such a good point. So, like, language is everything, right? Like, language really impact, no matter what, like, you can use language in all these creative ways to get across your point, that. And one of the things that I think semantics is important, and, like, the words that we're using. So to your point, like, political language and medical language are not the same thing. So medically, it's all abortion. It's all spontaneous abortion, regardless of, like, or it's spontaneous or elected abortion, right? So that's, like, the difference.
Abortion is categorized in, like, 3 ways. You're either early or you're late. You're either spontaneous or you're induced, or you're either inevitable or threatened. Like, that is how your doctor, like, communicates about abortions. People don't know that, and neither does the law. The law is like has made up all these things that just medically don't exist.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's so important to say, like, actually, a late term abortion or a D and X isn't someone who's like, I'm at week 30 of this pregnancy and I just want to kill this baby. It's actually someone who is managing a stillbirth.
Right.
Like, that is an important piece to say, of like, take all this jargon or whatever, like this complicated language, and say, what's actually happening here?
In real time, right? Because I think most people would have very different political views if they knew, like, oh shit, like this is actually what I'm doing. Like the Catholic Church is marked for a lot of, like, do you know how many people like care, like you have messed up because of your own personal belief?
Oh, and like also like,
you're responsible for that.
Like the Catholic Church is so great on like child welfare. That's all I'll say.
Listen, I believe them. You know, Maya Angelou say, believe people the first time. I believe them. I just believe them.
Yeah. Full stop.
I believe what I see.
Well, okay. So I know you're like, the conversation on abortion is stop having the conversation, which I appreciate.
No, I think I want people to ask better questions, not stop the conversation. I want people to ask better questions.
So, okay. So that's great. So ask better questions. So you've already listed a few of them, but like, what are the better questions we can be asking when it comes to abortion?
I think how do partners feel? I think
Sorry, say it again.
How do partners feel? I think that's something that doesn't come up enough. I think we need to know what abortions look like, right? Because because of like the medicalization of like reproductive health, like most people are like not accustomed to like seeing people like shake and vomit and have diarrhea, and like that's normal, you know, like it's like pretty much like industry standard for me. Like wherever I'm going, I know somebody's vomiting and somebody's pooping. Like that's just kind of my day. It's okay. But like we need to know like these things are normal, but like also like how do we support people around that? Like what is good for like the post-abortive body? Like, are you a postpartum person? Like how should you treat yourself? Like all these things that like instead of should you or should you not? Like, okay, but what about this? Mm-hmm. When can you have sex again? What's healthy? What's normal? What should you look out for? There's like so many other questions that are like pertinent to the conversation. What are my state laws? How far do I have to travel? If I need this, where can I get it?
Right.
Why do only some places have certain X-ray technology and other places don't? Like these are the questions that people should be asking.
These are all great questions. Where do we go to get answers for these questions? Like how do we find out how to answer them?
Well, you could always take my abortions and pregnancy conclusions doula training, but also you can visit my website. I'm updating my resource list.
Awesome.
There is a pro-choice allies group on Facebook that I think is amazing. That's ran by my best friend. Gutenmacher is, you know, pretty much a standard stop. Definitely like light a candle because this new administration is trying to but we'll be here.
Yeah. No, it's I mean the thing politically, right? This doesn't really change anything. You know, it's not like the Biden being elected changes some things, but ultimately it's the same shit we're going to be dealing with.
Listen, it's more diplomatically packaged and it's like less irate. That is it.
Yeah.
We're still like lobster on a trash can lid. Like it's still that. Don't be confused.
Yeah, and it's important to remember that it doesn't like again. There's a lot of nuances. There's a lot of bureaucracy. There's a lot of other things that happen that have nothing to do with the president or have nothing to do with whoever's in the White House, and doesn't mean one group over the other is going to be any better for anyone in particular.
Yeah,
I'm also glad it's not Trump.
Yeah.
But
I mean, listen, I think like presidents that like I feel like when you sit at like UN meetings, they're not laughing at us. That's like I know you're shitty at your job no matter what, but like I don't need like France snickering in the back.
Yeah, that's
like I don't.
Top campaign promise. Just tell me we're not going to get laughed at. Like that's
right. That's really all. Are you going to embarrass me in front of like the King of Nairobi? No. Okay. Cool. You can come. That's like. Really all I care about at this point.
I love it. I love that you're just like, we're not having this conversation. You're all fools. Don't laugh at us. Like, just let me do my work. Just out of my face.
I'm also a Leo with like a Taurus moon. So I'm very much like, can you just let me work?
This sets up for sure. Okay, awesome. So I'm trying to like see here what else. We talked about a lot of things.
We moved around a lot.
We did, which is what we're here to do. The dog is like, come out, play with me.
Right. Let me in. Let me ask a question.
I did like, I reposted your post on my feed. I had some like interesting responses from people. So I kind of just want to touch on those real quick.
Good.
And then we can wrap it up. So, I mean, it was a lot of good points I thought people brought up. And we kind of talked about this, like ancestral knowledge, you know, when it comes to abortion, birth, and all reproduction. Someone that I've learned a lot from and really enjoy is Samantha Zipporah. Yes. who is a womb continuum, all kinds of reproductive health person. But she talks about the idea, where is it? Where was I going with this? That call it pregnancy release. Like all outcomes are just pregnancy release. If you're pregnant, the pregnancy is released from your body in one shape or another. Full stop, pregnancy release.
Right. Yes, absolutely.
So yeah, our ancestors did, and we talked about that. We didn't talk.
I also think like I always like to talk about abortions and weather, and everybody looks at me because it's like always one of like my icebreaker questions, and they're like, "What the fuck are you talking about?" Right? Like, and I think like this example that I love is like oceanic people, right? Like abortions to them totally exist in another context, or like people who just live in like places that have like extreme weather, like you cannot have a baby on ice. It's not happening. Like you cannot do it, right? And so like because you compromise communal safety, it's not just your safety in it anymore. Like you're out here bleeding. There's a polar bear. You've invited this trouble to all of us. You cannot. It's not happening, right? And so like abortion in like different contexts is also like very much tied to like where we live and how we live. Right? Like that's kind of what like pregnancy viability is all about. Is like, is it safe for us in this community? And so like, I think like there are a lot of like historical examples of like people who have like lived in places with weather and like, yeah, of course they have all sorts of abortions because, you know, 6 months from now, like we're iced in or iced out or it's too hot or it's just not sustainable. Yeah, that's always like one of my favorite topics. It's like, how does intersect with like having a baby?
Totally. I think on that point you made another post about Inuit tribes and how timing of pregnancy specifically. And there's
you can't.
The other thing that I always like, or I think about in conjunction with abortion, because a lot of people say, oh, you're killing a baby. And in fact, like anytime I post anything about abortion, someone comes in and says like, abortion is murder. And you're like, sure. But do you know what actually is murder? Infanticide. Do you know that infanticide was our literal birth control for a very, very, very long time? Weird. Do you know, like, and speaking of weather, like in certain, I don't know specifically where, but I remember learning like in some Inuit tribes, if your male partner died and you had children under the age of, I think it was like 2 or 5, I can't remember. It's like somewhere in there though, you had to kill the children. Like the choice was like, we actually cannot take care of these children.
I think it's very different when like we live in like very small communities. Like the conversation becomes very black and white. Like, listen, this bison weighs 800 pounds and we only get so many pounds of meat off of it and we cannot feed you. So what would you like to do? Right? Like the conversation becomes a lot easier to have versus like we all feel like we can take care of people. And it's like, I think taking care of people is like more than like material resources. It's like, when that baby cries at 3 a.m., you need to want to do it, right? Because I know I'm not anybody's parent when I'm like, okay, you got to go back. You've cried 4 times. Thank you. Good night. Like, I like my sleep, and I'm just not there yet. It doesn't mean I won't get there. I'll probably get there in about 8 years. But desire needs to be a part of the conversation, right? Like, because it's a hard job. Parents, like, I am very grateful for my parents because I'm like, I'm not dealing with me. So I hope I don't get a me. Right. They would be outside. Like, it's not happening. Like, you need to want to do this job.
Yeah. And you need to be able, you need to have the resources to do the job. So you need to want it and then be supported in doing so. And I think one of, and in many cases, right, like we can have these like complicated conversations, whatever, about abortion, right? Because our ability to keep infants alive and keep people alive through pregnancy, all, the shit show in the US aside, nonetheless, like pregnancy, like a baby that would have died at 24 weeks, given the proper like access to medical care, can be kept alive and not just die as a miscarriage. So now we can have a conversation about like, well, is it a baby? Is it a human being at conception? Because in some cases, limited cases, that pregnancy, which would not have been viable under any other circumstances, can be viable. And so that it 100% has to do with the culture.
Viability becomes a very complicated conversation in like modern society, right? Yeah. It's like, is it or is it not? But like, fuck the pregnancy being viable. Is the pregnancy viable to me is the question. Rich is like, why? Like, these are the questions that like I'm always asking. And people, these are very morbid questions. I'm just like, but
you're a realist. You're a realist.
Also, I am a realist, and I just also like live in a society where people own guns, and I'm like, I don't think they're for like talking, right? Like I think like we like to live in like this very theoretical world, and it sounds very morbid, but it's like, no, we do reserve the right to harm, and it's like, it might make you uncomfortable, but it's not for fun. Like this.
Again, nature will eat you. Like nature doesn't give a fuck. Nature's like, we're starving.
Right. Nature understands resources and scarcity a little bit differently. And it's like, talk about it.
It's intense. And I think, and I think about that a lot in a lot of like medical conversations that are happening currently, and we don't need to get into all of them, but where it comes down to like, okay, we can have a philosophical debate about what we should be putting in our bodies, what we shouldn't be putting on our bodies, who's having babies, when they're having babies. We can do all those things, but we can only do those things because we actually live in a society that is rather wealthy and has new resources that our ancestors did not have. 50, 100 years ago, currently in a different part of the world, this isn't a conversation. It's not even a choice. It's just like, this is what you do. Like it becomes less about, is a cluster of cells a human soul that needs to like, must be born and have a life. And
that goes back to like that pro-choice conversation. Like, I think that's like that conversation doesn't belong to everybody. It doesn't belong to most of the world, right? It's like, are we going to eat tomorrow? Is this safe for me? Like, I think I think it's like very specific to like your pregnancy can only like cause harm to like, it's a very specific, like very privileged ideal that like my career is the only thing that's going to be harmed, or like with these other things. Like some people are thinking like, I actually might die because I do not have the resources to sustain this pregnancy. Like I can't get more food. Like I don't have any extra time. Like those are also other conversations other than like, I'm going to be inconvenienced in some way, or my career track is going to be delayed by 4 to 5 years. Like what?
Yeah, or I'm going to get some, which, again, like social things are real things too. Like if you're going to be ostracized or disowned, but that's also a conversation around like, am I going to be able to survive at the end of it? Right. It's ultimately like a survival conversation.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So the moral of the story is, stop having a conversation about should we or should we not. Have a conversation about, here are the new questions to ask. Have a question-based conversation.
Listen, also like, I think just ask people, like, I feel like the base question, how can I support you? Like, what support do you need? And sometimes like people just don't know, right? Yeah. And I think just like even opening that up, like I try not to like put my own ideals on people because I have very radical ideals. I kind of let people like reach their own conclusions. But I think just like providing people space to like speak freely. I think I've always been like the clinic escort because I'm like that one friend that like, I ain't judging you. Like, what do you? I'm a doula. I make people feel comfortable. Even though I'm mad radical. I make people feel comfortable somehow. What do you need? Like that's like a very basic question of like, let people fill in the blank.
Totally. Well, and I think that's perfect. I think that's a perfect thing. Like as a practitioner, that's what we all have to do, right? You can have radical ideas. You can have you can have all kinds of ideals and beliefs and things. And then it comes down to when you're with that person, like what do they need? And you have to take yourself out of the equation and say, okay, it's not a choice I would make ever under any circumstances, but you know what? That's what you want. We're gonna make that happen.
Wild shit. And I'm like, this is wild. And they're like, yep. And I'm like, okay. And you kind of just have to and again, all outcomes, all reasons is the attachment. Okay, this does not make sense in my mind. I'm actually advising you not to do this. However, if you want to do it, here's how you do it safely.
Yeah. Which is great, which is so good and so much better than being like, I don't agree with you, so you're on your own, which is sure a valid boundary response, but not useful if we're talking about
you're not committing a crime, I'm cool. As long as prison time is not associated, whatever, I don't care. It's not my life.
Right. I think it's an important part. And I think there are not to completely shit on the medical establishment in any way. There are many doctors who believe that as well. But then we get the legality, we get the morality, we get all those things in the way of care. And what does this person need? Even if it's a thing I would never do, even if it's a thing that's medically ill-advised, this is what they want. And they've been given as much information as we can give them. And this is still what they want.
Right. I also think about as somebody who works in death, do you know how hard the legality around killing yourself? It's all of these things that you should have the authority to do because it's your body becomes these very complicated legal precedents, and it's
why?
You need to be this is at home business, this is private business. Why?
We need a shirt for you that's just this is at home business.
Listen.
Make that. I will wear one. Okay, so just to wrap us up, we don't have any other questions specifically from people, but we'll see what people have to say afterwards. What I want to know is what is inspiring you these days? What are you inspired by, either in your personal life, but let's talk about it can be anything, but particularly when you are talking about your work, what continues to inspire you in this moment, in the chaos that is 2020? What makes you keep showing up?
The fact that people keep banging on my door. I think I've worked for myself for 3 years, and I think every day there's a moment where I'm fuck it, I quit, openly, out loud. And then my phone rings a couple minutes later, and it's damn, you could be my cousin. I should probably get here and assist you. I think, my clients keep me coming back. I think I love my client base. I love the things that I get to talk about. And I also think I picked a field that's they're snowflakes. I picked a snowflake career. No two experiences are identical. Somehow they're all distinctly unique. And it keeps my brain going. I don't know. It's the perfect job for me. I don't know. I don't have a good answer.
Okay, that's fine. Just curious. Yeah, ending this on a positive note of inspiration. It's the people.
It's the people. It's the people. It's all powered all the people. It's quite literally the people. They keep me coming back.
And that's why you're a community birth worker, community health provider. That's why you're here.
Yeah, I can't. I work in my childhood neighborhood. I do all the things that I've wanted to do. So, and I've also, and I've been very blessed to be here and to allow to stay here. So,
awesome. Well, I hope you continue to stay. Sounds like you have much to offer the people. And I'm excited. So people can find out about working with you either as a client or getting your trainings on your website, correct?
Yes, that is correct. birthintheblock.com. I don't know what 2021 is going to look like. We're definitely going to have more classes. Direct care, stay tuned. Placenta Shop is back open. That's it so far. We'll see.
Okay.
43 days of the year have to say.
Fabulous. We'll find out. Thank you again, Sarah. Thank you so much for being here and sharing all of your incredible talking points and questions and everything. It was lovely. For thanks to those of you who watched and to those of you who are watching and will watch. Let's continue to ask better questions. Let's stop having this stupid binary conversation and let's find out what people need. All right.
Yeah.
A lovely night. I'm gonna outro us out. Here we go.
Your cunt is special, there's so much to love. You and your pussy should fit like hand in glove. Whether it belongs to you or your lover, there is so much to discover. See you next time, the Clam Jam's got you covered. The Clam Jam.